Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Sutherland, and today we are going to start our next topic of the year, and this is topic 9, which is on solving quadratic equations. And so let me just talk a little bit about this. You do not need to write any of this down. I'll tell you when you should start writing things for your notes. But we started this year by solving linear equations. So a linear equation, when we solve that, would look like something like when does 4x minus 12 equals 0? And so we know for linear equations, we add 12 to both sides. We get 4x equals 12, divide by 4, and we get x to be 3. Now, quadratic equations are different. So with quadratic equations, we have a quadratic function. So something like x squared plus 5x plus 4, and we want to know when that equals 0. We can't do the same things that we did with a linear equation because we can't get just x by itself. There's an x squared here. And so throughout this chapter, there are 4 ways we're going to work on solving quadratic equations. The first section we're going to do is by graphing. And with graphing, we are going to use technology. And so you are allowed to use your calculators for this. Or if you don't have your calculator or the batteries there or something, you can always use Desmos on the computer. Just go to desmos.com. Then we're going to look at an algebraic way to do it. We're going to bring back factoring and talk about how factoring can help us solve quadratic equations. Then we're going to use square roots, and then we're going to finally close by using the quadratic formula. But our whole goal is going to be to solve equations that look like this. So let's start today with an example. So this is where we would go ahead and start writing these things down in your notes. So I'll give you a second. You can pause if you need to at any time so you can have time to write things down, and then you can come back when you're ready. So section 9.1a, we're going to work on solving quadratic equations with graphs. I hope everyone is doing well out there. I miss you guys. It's really weird teaching still through this computer. I hope you're learning something. You're giving your best effort. That's all I can ask for. And stop by and say hi later this week when we have the office hours on Google Meet, just to say hi and see how you're doing. You took your first quiz last class. I gave that back to you. You can see on Google Classroom how you did, which ones you missed, and we'll continue working on that stuff too going forward. So let's look at our first example here. So example 1, we're going to solve this equation, the one we were just talking about, x squared plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So if I want to solve this by graphing, what we're going to do is we're going to graph this side. On our calculator, we're going to call it f of x, or I think it's going to be f1 of x or f of x on Desmos. And what this means is we want to know when does it hit 0. We're going to call that, what are the zeros of the quadratic, of the function. And what this means is, where does your graph cross the x-axis? So if you remember, right, we have an x and y axis. We are looking for where the graph crosses the x-axis, and that's going to be our answers. That's going to be our solution. Sometimes with a quadratic, you're going to have 2 answers. Sometimes you're going to have 1, and sometimes you're going to have none, and we're going to see all of those examples today. So I'm going to show both methods here for technology. If you have your calculator, you're going to go to the home screen, where I'm going to do a new document, and I am going to add a graph. And where it says f1 of x, I'm going to type in our function. So x squared plus 5x plus 4. And there's my parabola. I'm gonna move this out of the way. And so what I want to do, the solution, when does this equal 0? It's when we cross the x-axis. So here's my x-axis, and we're looking for where it crosses. Now, to find that, here are the commands. So remember, you can always pause and rewind here if you need to see this a couple times. I'm going to go Menu, Analyze Graph. I'm going to find the zeros. Now I have my line. I go to the left of the first one, click OK. I go to the past it. There's my first 0 at -4. And then I do the same thing again. So Analyze Graph, 0, go to the left, go to the right, and there are my two answers. This graph crosses it at two different places. So what I would do is, for my work, I would simply just draw a quick sketch. It's not a very good straight line. A quick sketch of what we see here. We have a parabola that hit 2 points, and 1 point was -4, 0. The other point was -1, 0. So we would say for this one, our solutions are x equals -4 or x equals -1. There are two answers here. 2 times your graph hits 0. Now, if you don't have a calculator, what I would use is go ahead and I would go to Desmos. So here's Desmos. I already here on the left, you can see I have it graphed x squared plus 5x plus 4. And now I'm just going to look at, here's my x-axis, and I can click where that crosses, and I can see there are my two intersection points. So you can decide when you're at home now if you want to use Desmos, if that's easier for you, go ahead and do that. Okay, let's try another problem. So example 2, why don't you solve this equation? When does x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0? So why don't you guys pause the video, graph this on either your calculator or with Desmos, and then see if you can find the answer or answers. And then I'll come back and go over it with you. All right, I'm back here. So I'm going to move this up. So we're just looking at this problem. I'm going to go ahead and draw a little XY grid so I can sketch a little graph of the parabola that we get. So I'm going to go to the calculator. I'm going to do a new document. I don't want to save this old one. And I'm going to add another graph. And our function was, our quadratic was x squared minus 10x plus 25, and I graph it, and look at what we have this time. As our graph comes down, it only hits the x-axis once. If I do Menu, Analyze Graph, 0, I go to the left of it, click, go to the right, I get one place it crosses the x-axis, just one. Let's look at Desmos and see if that verifies that. So in Desmos, we're done with this first one. Here's the second one I just had you do. And also, if I look here and click there, it only crosses it at 1 point at 5, 0. So this quadratic function, if I were to sketch the graph, I sketch it, it crosses at 5, 0. So for this quadratic function, there is only one answer, and that answer is x equals 5. So far we've had one problem where you have two answers, one problem where you have one answer. So now here we got two more problems we're going to do, everyone. So try this one now. For example, 3. Solve. Let's do x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0 by graphing. So again, pause the video and then try it and then come back and see how you did. Okay, here we go. So again, I'm going to draw, and this is the only thing you really have to show for work. If I ever have you, do a worksheet or anything, you just sketch the XY axis. I'm going to go back to my document on the calculator. I'm going to do a new document. And for this one, I am going to do x squared plus x minus 6. Press enter. All right, looks like we have another one where it crosses in two places. So again, I go menu, analyze graph, 0, go to the left, go to the right, I get 1 at -3. And now I use that command another time. Go to the left, go to the right, and I get 2. And let's check it out with Desmos and see if it is the same thing. So we're done with this one. Here's the one I just told you guys to look at. So there's the whole graph. We can see it crosses the x-axis at -3 and at 2. So we are getting the same answer. So I'm just going to draw a little picture here. It doesn't have to be super accurate. We've got -3, 0, and 2, 0. So those are the x-intercepts. So for the solutions, we say it's x equals -3 or x equals 2. All right, one last question. Example 4. So for this one, solve this equation. X squared plus x plus 3 equals 0. Again, pause the video, try to graph it, see what you notice, and then come back to me. All right, let's take a look at what happens with this problem. So I have my x-axis, my y-axis. I'm going to go ahead and do my new document here. And we've got a graph, and I am graphing x squared plus x plus 3. And when I graph that, what do you notice? Well, this graph never crosses the x-axis. Let's check and see if the same thing happened with Desmos. So I am going to X this one because that was example 3. Here's example 4. It's kind of off the grid, so I move it around. It never crosses the x-axis. So what I would do here is I sketch my graph kind of look like this. And so I would say this graph, this equation has no solution. Right? It never crosses the x-axis. So when we're solving a quadratic equation by graphing, we are going to graph the quadratic using our calculator or Desmos, and you are trying to find when it crosses the x-axis. As long as that is the case, as long as these quadratics equal 0. And we're going to get to situations where they're not 0, and then we just move things around to make them 0. So we're always looking at that x-axis. I hope this was helpful. If you need to rewind, rewatch it, please do. If you have questions, please email me. Take care, everyone, and I hope to see you all, or at least talk to you soon. Bye.